Hello, everyone, and welcome back. For those that weren't able to join us yesterday, my name is Ben Kirshner. I'm science lead on our political advocacy and nonprofit team here at Civis. Really excited to welcome you to a session with Jeff Harrison from Greenpeace. We've been working with Jeff and Greenpeace for quite some time now to help them build their data capacity across the federation, across their organization. Unfortunately, Jeff is based in Australia, where I believe it's currently 2:30 in the morning. So we didn't ask him to pull an all-nighter for us, but he did record a presentation that I will kick off shortly. I'm really excited to have Jeff be able to share how he thinks about the challenge of developing data capacity at such a large and complex organization. So with that, I will kick it off, and please enjoy.
Hi, everyone, and I'll just kick off my presentation. Great, so this session is called Driving Data Maturity at Greenpeace Scale. From my conversations with Civis over the years, I believe that we're one of the few international clients that they have, and we've been rolling out Civis for the last 3 years. So I think we have a pretty interesting story to share with all of you. To start it off, I'll just start with an introduction for myself. So my name is Jeff Harrison. I'm the head of insights at Greenpeace International. Greenpeace International is based in Amsterdam, but I actually live down here in Australia. I've been with Greenpeace for 9 years and 4 years in my current position. And I actually joined the organization as a climber and an organizer. So I came from the activist side of things and had kind of an unusual career path, making it into the area of data. My education is basically a specialization in management of technology. So it's nice to meet everyone. And Greenpeace, in case you haven't heard of us, I know America's a big country. So we began in Vancouver, Canada back in 1971. So we're coming up to 50 years next year, or this year. And we're an environmental nonprofit with about 5,000 staff across 55 countries of operations. We're independent, which is a unique thing, meaning that we don't take any money from corporations or governments. That means we have a big focus on our supporters and on our donors. And currently we have between 50 million supporter relationships or people that engaged with us in a supportive way back in 2020. But since I'm talking to data people, you'll know that the level of duplication in those numbers is very hard to estimate across channels. So that's why there's such a large range. And of course, one of the most iconic parts about Greenpeace is we have ships all around the world, and we sometimes get arrested holding yellow banners. So that's us. I'd also like to start by just sharing the goals of my presentation. So I'd like to share our journey as we push forward the data maturity of quite a large federated organization, our implementation of Civis and how we've approached using that technology and architecture to achieve our goals. And then the solution that we came to is about embracing a hub and spoke approach to data for a large organization. And I've got some learnings we can share at the end. And before we start anything else, I want to say thanks to the team who made this happen. I'm giving the presentation, but this work has been done by many individuals at Greenpeace International who've been working on this for years. So thanks to everyone for helping deliver this big solution. So the first thing to speak about is that Greenpeace is a federated network. And I imagine many people aren't familiar with that. So I like to say that we may not have the biggest budgets, we may not have the most data of people in this conference, but we certainly have the most complex organizational structure. So federation means that we are a network. In each office is legally independent. So they are separate organizations legally. There's no management hierarchy, so we can't control the offices. And essentially, we create international agreements or treaties between the CEOs, and that's how we operate as a global network. So everything is kind of like running a big opt-in coalition. So change really happens by influence, not by hard power. There's really no formal processes to enforce standards in the offices if they don't want them. And for any major decision, we've got 27 regional entities and thus stakeholders for any decision to move forward. So it's very complicated, and it's really more of a network of cooperation than a traditional organization. So you might be looking at this and thinking that I have probably one of the most challenging jobs at driving a data program forward. And here's some footage of our actual work. At times, it really does feel like chasing cats around the world and trying to get them to align into strategy when we all have our own interests and perspectives. So where did our journey begin at Greenpeace? So I joined, as I mentioned, 4 or 5 years ago. The first thing, of course, whenever you're considering a data strategy and your data capabilities, is you got to ground in your organizational mission. So we've done a lot of thinking behind this, and we think that there are four main ways or categories where data can support Greenpeace's mission. So the first, which is probably the most obvious, is to help us run better campaigns. So to be more informed in our decision making, to be responsive to the external environment, and to be impactful and to be able to measure that impact, and thus feed that back into our decisions and cycles. The second is engagement. I mentioned that we are supporter driven and funded by supporters, but also engaging people in our campaign is a part of our power. So we want to really meaningfully give these people a great experience, a personalized experience when they come to Greenpeace. Fundraising, which is of course the most common use of data. We want to efficiently raise money and grow our organization. And then finally, I like to think about organizational as being a category of its own. So we want to run an equitable and effective organization. And so there are many initiatives in Greenpeace that don't fit neatly into the other ones, such as monitoring diversity and inclusion, monitoring performance of staff, and monitoring the impact of what we're doing as an org, things like hiring. So those are the four categories that we break down our mission into, and we like to nest things under them when we're doing our planning. But typically, when I walked into the org, there was a lot of siloed thinking and siloed planning happening in organizational departments. So it's very common to see information systems mimic organizational departments. So we would see a separate system, a data system in fundraising, a separate data system in finance, and a separate data system in digital and web. And chances are other departments may have nothing at all, but lots of needs that aren't being met because they're a lower priority. So that's often what we walk into. That's at the office level for our regions. I'm sure this is similar for most other organizations. But when you pull back and you go to the global scale, we actually have 27 times this happening because there's 27 entities. So from my perspective, there's basically a network of offices doing their own thing. And then we kind of lubricate the whole system with Excel spreadsheets moving between the entities. So primarily, this is for reporting pathways. Because everything was so difficult and expensive back then, there's very minimal reporting and very minimal information exchange or data exchange between the offices. So we'd see a lot of Excel sheets going quarterly or even annually at that level of reporting, which, as you can imagine, for decision making is not very good. So that's what we walked into. And this resulted in some pretty typical challenges that I'm sure everyone's familiar with. So we had a lot of on-premise architecture that was hard to migrate to the cloud. We had a major overuse of Excel. There's lots of manual reporting processes and data processes. At the time, we had 20 data teams around the world, basically working in isolation with no community or communication. There's very little adoption of advanced analytics or data science, so we're really just doing the basics. Data silos. So we see data silos, I mentioned, within countries, between teams. Basically, very little data was being brought together. And an interesting challenge we have is highly variable data maturity. So we would see some countries with a very strong data team, very high capability. And we see other people where there's not a single analyst or data person in the organization, or even between departments. So we might see that the HR department is getting underserved, whereas the fundraising department has a lot of data capability. And then finally, from my perspective, when we do global planning, we were relying on quarterly and annual cycles. And we unfortunately, largely do rely on those tried and true methods of bringing in data. But that's kind of the challenges we faced. So how did we approach this solution? So first of all, one of the big strategies we adopted was to create a stronger center for data. So when we came in, you could call it uncoordinated, dispersed, or an unplanned model. So every office was working independently with no communication or centralization. And what we've come to is what we call the hub and spoke model, which we try to balance the benefits of centralization and decentralization. So centralization is great for specialized skills, efficiency, and standardization. So it's great in a number of ways, but unfortunately it can be slow, it can be clunky, it can result in low service. And also we have a lot of respect for the knowledge and perspective of the regional offices. And by centralizing all decisions, we're likely to make a lot of suboptimal decisions and to ask offices to do things that aren't right. So we really do want to push as much decision-making we can out to the offices. They are independent. So by push it, I mean they want to keep it. And when we're asking to bring things centrally, we have to have a really good use case for it. So we are pushing for a little bit more interdependence, a little bit more co-ownership where it helps. So the second thing is, again, what are we trying to do with data? Thinking about our data strategy and thinking about the needs and where things should sit in the organization. So we have this international hub that we're building, and we have our regional offices. After a lot of analysis, it came to be quite clear that most of the what we'll call the real work, the day-to-day, the programmatic work, happens in the regional offices. And our role is to empower that and to enable it through technology. We don't want to start doing it for them. So it's really important that we realize they're doing most of the work. And the International Hub, in terms of our core business, it's mostly about monitoring, planning, selecting the right campaigns, deciding where funding should go. So it's a lot of that decision making fundamentally. But the really great analytics work needs to happen at the regional level. So when we think about the capabilities, we've sort of broken these down. I won't go through them in detail, but what should the International Hub do? What should the regional office do? And we kind of split that up as a first way of thinking. And then we thought, how do we want to introduce capabilities to the organization? So we saw a very large gap from where we'd like to be, from where we are. And first of all, you can see that we really brought in Civis to fill a lot of these gaps. So we realized that in-house, we had a pretty strong strength in insights and analytics and data management. That's a core business thing. Every office has to do it to some extent. So we really wanted to build that up and support it in-house and complement that with work from Civis. So we brought Civis in to help us with our data architectural planning and doing data engineering from us. And they still do a lot of that today. And then over the next few years, we've slowly increased what we're asking Civis to do. So helping develop products, helping support the community as a group, and then slowly having a strategy to build up our in-house capability. But we wanted to move faster than we could move just in-house. As you all know, there's a lot of processes when you want to hire people, build teams, especially when you're building up a new capability and you don't have any in-house knowledge to lean on. So we leaned on Civis quite heavily to get us over the hump that we're starting to get over now in 2021. Now down to the solution and roadmap. So this will go a little bit technical for those who are interested. So I guess what is the objectives of our solution, thinking about the lay of the land? So first of all, the most important thing has to be to enable our NROs and to increase the value the data provides to our organization. That's always the North Star. That's always the entire purpose of a data strategy. The second is to design an architecture that meets our need and doesn't just mimic our organizational structure. So in any organization, there are silos, there are fragments. And in ours, because we're a federated network, that's probably an order of magnitude worse. And so winning the political battles to cooperate on things like architecture is something that we wanted to do because we feel like it's right. We wanted to introduce the hub and spoke model to ensure that we can realize capabilities, even if it's not realistic to expect every regional office to have a capability like data engineering. We need to have that somewhere in the organization. We want to enable sharing easily across the network so we can share code, reports, and knowledge. We want to reduce cost. We want to reduce duplication of work. I often say that a lot of work is duplicated 27 times if each office is doing it alone. Something like financial reporting, we all need it. And if we pursue it individually, it's literally 27 times the work. So we're going to go a lot faster if we can share and stop that duplication. And then finally, we wanted to unify our data strategy across all of our engagement areas and campaigns. So fundraising, engagement, web, campaigns, and social media. We wanted to really holistically have this all in the same platform and have the same strategy for it. So in the hub and spoke model, I like to bring up the data value chain and how we break up the data value chain into these different components. So the first part, which is integration, ingestion, and storage and transformation, that's something we wanted to see more strongly with the central hub. So it doesn't mean offices can't do it, but it means that the central hub will prioritize it. And the reason why we picked that is because it really requires highly specialized skills. Typically, the work's more standardized. So if we're bringing in data from Facebook, that's basically identical for every office. We can do it with the same script. The use cases are common. So, we want email data, we want social media data, we want finance data, we want it moved and stored. These are identical requirements for every office, and we can really reuse the code. And then what we wanted to make sure that the offices are prioritizing is the stuff at the end of the pipeline. So first of all, it builds on their existing strengths. I mentioned there's already data management and insights capabilities in the offices, so we wanted to double down on that. We picked it also because the work is more custom. So if you're building a report, you need to have a very close relationship with the manager who's going to use it. It's very hard to get that insight into the central team to deliver something, which requires close contact with the user and often a shorter delivery time. We created a regional data architecture. So this was the first wave of Civis. So we created a standardized regional instance, basically a cookie cutter launch of Civis that met the basic needs of an office. So our offering was that we would integrate data from any location. You can see the symbol for that. We'd also create analytical data models, which standardize their data globally. and we'd release a basic set of reports and metrics so they could get running. So you could see the individual offices. That's what it looks like. The next step, building on that, I wanted to emphasize this key strategy, which is around the analytical model. So a little detail here is that we have a lot of source systems. So even CRMs, we have 7 different CRMs or more. Some of them are in-house built. Some of them are real old systems. And it's really hard to bring that all together. So we wanted to create a standardized analytics layer, which we would take that information and conform it into a set standard. These are the tables we created for someone who's interested. So these met our basic requirements for data. And to give you an example of what the exact table standard looks like at the detailed level. So that's a huge piece of what we did, this kind of intellectual property standard. And then we started building up the central offering. So we started providing central products and services. As you can see, within the Civis platform, we'd bring in data and offer products back out to the offices. This would also allow us to do global monitoring and reporting, which we required for the central office. And within those data standards, that's the basis for building the product environment. The second thing is that what are the products that we're making? We're making things that are really common use cases, things like automated supporter segmentation, bringing in standardized data assets, or making standardized reports. As we built it out, we started to form what you could call a virtualized federation. So while it feels like a federation because each office has its own instance, we create that with the basic permissions. It's secure, it's private, they have complete control over it, but it's within the same data platform. And so we get the benefits of a shared data platform, like sharing compute storage resources, reusing of code and tools, sharing between the entities, sharing of specialized staff who exist in the center hub. And when we wanted to integrate this data with another product, such as our website that we've built in-house, a single integration can pull the data from all the offices into that product, simplifying further larger technology integration. Recently, starting last year, we started building up our in-house data engineering. And so we've built this in-house team. They've started focusing on highly standardized data sources. I mentioned Facebook as a great example, things like that are very cookie cutter for every office. As we build up this competency, we're still relying on Civis for a lot of the integration work. And honestly, we push the hardest work to Civis, the most customized work, like those strange old databases we find around the organization. And the other thing with the data engineering team is they have an org-wide mandate. And so they're doing things like real-time systems integration. So they're not strictly focused on Civis, they're looking at everyone. Next piece is that since we have this federation, we need to govern it properly. And so a big piece of what we've put in place is around maintaining trust and control through proper data governance. We've got a data governance council. We've got a framework that manages relationships between all the entities. And because of GDPR, we require explicit documentation for any sharing between an entity, since we're not the same organization. Most data stays with the entity, and we have to have a very good use case of documentation to move it. So this is an enabling thing that we've had to build out globally. And then finally, because really our success depends on the success of the regional teams, we're now building out an in-house support and training capacity. So we want to grow that in-house support. We've relied on Civis a lot, but we've got to bring it in-house, especially because we're all around the world. And doing things like maturing our service level agreements and ticket processes to get more and more professional with supporting our offices. And that's kind of where we landed. So you can kind of see how the system all works together. So what are the progress and learnings? So I guess where are we today? So we're 3 years into this project. We've deployed 13 virtual Civis instances that capture 23 country markets. So now we're supporting teams in North and South America, in Europe, Asia, and Africa, so all around the world. Our global data staff, which combined between the center and all of our offices, is now over 120 people. So we've got a pretty big team. We're building really important and new capabilities such as data engineering and governance that really enable the Civis architecture to succeed. And we have still a big focus, I got to be honest, on delivering global fundraising and finance business intelligence capabilities. So we have delivered those in the offices, but we're still working to put together the final pieces so that we have that near real-time monitoring of all of our offices' finance. So what are the learnings? One of our biggest, I wouldn't say a misstep, but in our thinking, we were even siloed thinking within this project. We wanted to bring together, I mentioned, all of many departments and many different teams, but my recommendation now is that really the data strategy must include all departments from day one. So we started from an engagement and fundraising perspective and grew out there. And as the project matured, it became untenable to maintain these false divisions. So my strongest recommendation is to take the entire organization from day one when you're planning out your data architecture and systems. The other part is that building the foundation, if you told me it would take this long, I probably wouldn't have believed you, but really it takes years to build out a global foundation that we're trying to do. But it's too slow. And so in many ways, we have now focused on a product level when we talk about realizing value. So if you just focus on building one layer of your foundation and your pyramid at a time, it'll take years until any value is realized. Instead, we try to take a per product approach. So we take one product, we build its foundation, and then build every layer for that product so that product can be used, and we go on to the next one. The other part was it's always about balancing the tried and true people, process, and technology framework. So in many of our offices, the adoption of Civis was quite disruptive because it disrupted siloed processes, siloed thinking, and caused larger organizational conversations. One example is some of our offices have discovered they had completely different definitions for metrics in different teams, and then they needed to go through a metric consolidation process. So keep in mind, you got to move all three of these forward at the same time, or they'll very quickly become a bottleneck. So overinvestment in technology, if your people can't keep up or your organizational processes can't keep up, you're not going to realize that investment. And another learning that we've had is that at the scale that we're talking, looking to standardize end products, isn't realistic. So we have tried standardizing the final end reports and things like that, because there's a good value proposition about reducing duplication, and that many use cases are similar, particularly in fundraising. You'd think it would be similar, but after rolling this out in so many countries, I'm just always surprised by the level of variation that exists in the smallest things you'd never think of. And so now we're really focusing, as I mentioned, on the first stages of the value chain, and trying to enable users and trying to get those end products to be produced as close to the end user as possible. And then finally, while we have had a lot of success in the central strategies, the other part is that a central strategy, you always have the information bottlenecks, trying to get that information, the learnings that you have out to all the other people. So the central team has a lot of learnings and they're not being sufficiently used across our organization. So getting solid support for the staff and solid communication practices so that you can get this information out to all of your team is the best way forward. So investing on that early and making sure that communications doesn't become a bottleneck for your strategy. That's the end. So again, my name's Jeff Harrison. Please, since I'm not able to attend this conference due to my time zone, I encourage you to reach out. I'd love to hear from other data professionals in other organizations or to talk about what you're doing or some of the things in this presentation. And I've also got my LinkedIn there. Please drop me a line on LinkedIn. That's another way to contact me. So thanks a lot.
Though he's unable to join us live, I do want to say a major thanks to Jeff for pulling together that presentation. I hope you all found it as informative as we did. And as Jeff said, please do feel free to reach out. With that, we'll take a quick break and be back at the top of the hour to share a little bit more about our COVID vaccine outreach intelligence center. See you soon.